The cornerstone of American freedom rests in an individual's right to express themselves. If there is no freedom of speech, there can be no freedom, especially if one isn't free to criticize his own government, which happens to be tightening the noose of tyranny around the necks of those who want to be left alone. Few things in history encapsulate the resilience, unity, hope, and struggle for that freedom than Francis Scott Key's 1814 Star-Spangled Banner, originally titled Defense of Fort McHenry. Yet, less than a half a century later, in the turbulent early days of the American Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln took bold, controversial, and outright criminal steps to do what he called preserving the Union. One of the most striking and still hotly debated examples of his wartime measures was the imprisonment of a man named Frank Key Howard. And the startling irony isn't lost on those who are rightly critical of a consistently hypocritical and evil government. You see, Frank was a Baltimore editor in the North during Lincoln's presidency, not in the South. And there's one other small detail some historians would like to forget. Newly minted Lincoln prisoner Frank Key Howard was the grandson of Francis Scott Key, the author of the Star-Spangled Banner. By 1861, Baltimore, Maryland, was a powder keg of divided loyalties. Although Maryland remained part of the Union, many of its citizens sympathized with the Confederacy. In April of that year, Confederate supporters in Baltimore attacked Union troops passing through the city in what became known as the Pratt Street Riot, leaving several dead and inflaming tensions. Lincoln, determined to keep Maryland from seceding and isolating Washington, D.C., declared martial law in parts of the state and authorized the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, a cornerstone of civil liberties that protects against unlawful imprisonment. Frank Key Howard, the editor of the Baltimore Exchange, was a vocal critic of Lincoln's policies. In his editorials, he denounced the president's suspension of habeas corpus as unconstitutional and lambasted the federal government's decision to arrest pro-Confederate Maryland legislators, effectively preventing a vote on secession. On September 13, 1861, Howard was arrested by Union soldiers under the authority of General Nathaniel P. Banks. His offense? Writing editorials that questioned Lincoln's actions and criticized the military occupation of Baltimore. Howard was taken from his home at night and imprisoned without trial at Fort McHenry, the very site where his grandfather had penned the words to America's national anthem during the War of 1812, 47 years earlier. Howard's imprisonment carried a bitter irony. As he gazed out from the fort's ramparts, he could see the flag that inspired his grandfather's immortal lines. "Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?" For Howard, the sight was a cruel contradiction. To him, the Union flag no longer symbolized liberty but oppression, as he languished in a cell for expressing his views. Howard remained imprisoned for over a year, eventually being transferred to Fort Lafayette in New York Harbor. Like many others detained under Lincoln's wartime measures, he was never formally charged with a crime or given a trial. Lincoln's decision to suspend habeas corpus and imprison critics like Howard remains one of the most contentious aspects of his presidency. Defenders argue that such measures were necessary to prevent the Union's disintegration at a time of unprecedented crisis. But, as history has shown, necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedoms. It's the argument of tyrants, like Lincoln, and it's the creed of the enslaved. Tyrants want to convince you that, in order to secure freedom, you need to accept their despotism and oppression. In other words, they want you to believe that the pathway to liberty is through the tunnel of tyranny. Critics rightly contend that Lincoln's actions represented a serious overreach of executive power, setting a dangerous precedent for civil liberties in wartime. The despotic will rarely let a good crisis go to waste. And if they can use a crisis to trample on rights, what's to stop them from creating more crisis situations in order to remove rights altogether? In the years following the war, Howard published a scathing memoir, 14 Months in American Bastilles, in which he detailed his imprisonment and condemned Lincoln's actions as despotic. His account added fuel to the ongoing debate over the balance between national security and individual rights, a debate that echoes in American history to this day. The imprisonment of Frank Key Howard illustrates the extreme measures Lincoln was willing to take to, in his words, preserve the Union. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of maintaining freedom at all costs and in all situations. We must, as Patrick Henry has said, guard with jealous attention the public liberty, not the public safety or national security, and suspect everyone who comes near that precious jewel. Nothing will defend liberty but downright force. And when we give up that force, we are ruined. But rather than guard freedoms from the jaws of political predators, history has shown that the U.S. government has opted to enshrine as gods those who would take those freedoms away. The Lincoln Memorial stands as a sobering reminder that the government currently being run out of Washington's den of criminals will install its king on the throne. A king who will look down on and imprison every one of us should we dare to stand up and speak in opposition to the blatant tyranny that threatens to destroy this land. Frank Key Howard's story, filled with irony, defiance, and constitutional questions, is a poignant chapter in the larger narrative of the uncivil war of tyrannical aggression. Weigh in with your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Abraham Lincoln was a hero or a villain? Should there be temples erected in his honor? Is it ever right to suspend American freedoms in crisis situations or for national security? Are politicians like Lincoln ever to be trusted? What was the real reason for the initiation of the Civil War? If you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe now, hit the notification bell, like and share this video, and I'll see you in the next one.